when Tavian Brooks texted me, "Mom, we had to cancel the family trip. Finances won't allow it. We'll reschedule for later." I actually believed him. I spent the entire summer working extra shifts while they, or so they told me, were also putting in the effort to get back on their feet financially. Then 3 weeks later I opened Instagram and discovered the truth. My daughter-in-law, Keandra Brooks, had posted pictures from a Caribbean cruise. My whole family was there. Tavian Brooks was wearing a crisp white linen shirt and smiling in the sunshine. Chantel was wearing a fancy, expensive coral dress. My grandkids, DeMonte and Araya, were sporting designer straw hats that must have cost a fortune on those ships. Even Keandra Brooks's parents, Mr. Lionel Hayes and Mrs. Viola Hayes Holt, were in the picture, toasting with champagne. Everyone was there except me. The caption read, "Unforgettable family vacation." Unforgettable. That word felt like a rusty knife twisting in my chest. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, and I didn't call them. I simply remained silent and went on with my life as if nothing had happened. However, in that moment something inside me broke, and it broke permanently. 3 weeks after I found out, my phone vibrated at 7 o'clock in the morning. It was Tavian Brooks. "Mom, I urgently need $6,000. Credit card issue. I'll pay you back next month." I read the message 5 times. Each word felt like a slap in the face. Urgent as always, just like it had been for the last 8 years. My fingers trembled as I typed the reply. "Ask your wife's family." Those 4 words changed everything. They cost me decades of submission, but they gave me something I never imagined: freedom. Tavian Brooks tried to call 17 times that day. I didn't answer any of them. Chantel sent me a long message filled with confusing explanations about misunderstandings and surprises. I deleted it without reading the whole thing. That same afternoon, I went to the bank and closed the joint account we had shared for years. I canceled the extra cards they had in their names. I blocked the automatic transfers. And for the first time in almost a decade, I could breathe without feeling a hand on my throat. But to really understand why those 4 words were so powerful, I need to go back to the very beginning. I need to tell you how a 73-year-old black woman who had worked her entire life ended up being the ATM for her own family. How a mother's love became a gilded trap that she didn't even know how to escape. It all started 8 years ago, when my husband, Leander Dupree, passed away, leaving me alone with a paid-off house, a decent pension, and some savings. I was devastated, but Tavian Brooks seemed even more affected. He was my only son, my reason for living, and seeing him suffer broke my heart. One afternoon, 2 months after the funeral, he came to visit with Keandra Brooks. They sat on the very couch where I'm remembering all of this right now, and Tavian Brooks took my hand with that tenderness he always knew how to use so well. "Mom, I need to ask you for something," he said softly. "Chantel and I want to throw a special Sweet 16 party for Araya. You know how she is, so sensitive, so fragile. But with the expense of Dad's funeral and the way the economy is, we just can't swing it. I know it's a lot to ask, but could you lend us $10,000? I promise we'll pay you back in 6 months." I looked at Keandra Brooks. She nodded with a perfect smile, one that she had probably practiced in the mirror. "It's just a temporary loan, Marlene Dupree. We want Araya to have a beautiful memory of this milestone. You understand, right?" Of course I understood. I was the grandmother. I was the one who had to understand. I was the one who had just lost her husband and needed to feel useful. I needed to feel like I still mattered to someone. So I said yes. I transferred the $10,000 the very next day. Araya had her party at an upscale private venue with colored lights and a chocolate fountain. I sat at a back table watching my granddaughter dance happily. They never paid me back. They never mentioned it again, and I never asked about it. 6 months later came the next request. "Mom, we need to remodel the kitchen. The pipes are old and there's a moisture problem." Then it was Chantel's car because hers broke down. After that, it was private university for DeMonte because the public option wasn't up to par. $45,000, $15,000 per year for 3 years. Each time there was a reason. Each time it was urgent. Each time it was temporary. And each time I opened my account and transferred the money without too many questions because that's what mothers do, right? Sacrifice. Give without expecting anything in return. Be the invisible support holding everything together from the shadows. But what I didn't understand then, what took me years and $60,000 to realize, is that there's a huge difference between helping and being used, between love and manipulation, between family and convenience. The first years after Leander Dupree's death were confusing. I was lost in an ocean of loneliness, clinging to any floating board that would keep me afloat. And Tavian Brooks knew it. He knew every one of my weaknesses, every vulnerable corner of my heart as a widowed mother. He would visit on Sundays with Chantel and the kids, always with that long hug that made me feel like I still had a family, that I still mattered. "Mom, you look tired," he'd say while Chantel made coffee in my kitchen as if she owned the place. "You should rest more. We're here for whatever you need." And I felt lucky. How foolish, how blind, how desperately lonely I must have been not to see that those visits always ended with a request wrapped up like a gift. Tavian Brooks had a special talent for making his needs sound like family emergencies. He never said, "I want." He always said, "We need." It was never for him. It was always for the children, for the future, to maintain stability at home. "Mom, DeMonte needs a math tutor if we want him to get into a good university." "Mom, Araya needs braces urgently. The dentist says if we don't do it now, it'll be worse later." "Mom, we need to replace the roof. There are leaks and it could be dangerous." Every argument was solid. Every reason seemed legitimate. And I, who had worked for 53 years as a certified nursing assistant and in hospital housekeeping, who had saved every penny with the discipline of someone who knows what scarcity feels like, opened my wallet again and again. Chantel was subtler but just as effective. She never asked directly. Instead, she dropped poisoned comments disguised as concern. "Oh, Marlene Dupree, it's a shame you can't come to DeMonte's birthday at the club, but I understand those places are a little too formal for you. It's a pity Araya can't go on the class trip to Europe with her friends. But hey, not all kids have the same opportunities." And I, feeling guilty for having money while my grandchildren supposedly lack something, ended up offering help that was never directly requested but was clearly expected. $3,000 for the trip, $2,000 for the club membership, $100 for Araya's green graduation dress. Small financial bleedings that added up and formed a river of money flowing in only one direction. There were signs I ignored, small alarms I turned off because recognizing them would have meant admitting something too painful. Like that time I drove past their house and saw a brand new SUV in the driveway. A shiny current year model with chrome rims reflecting the sun. When I asked Tavian Brooks about it, he said it was borrowed from a friend. 2 months later, I saw Keandra Brooks driving it. Or when Araya posted photos of a weekend at a beach resort, and I mentally calculated that the trip must have cost at least $4,000, just 1 month after Tavian Brooks told me they were struggling with cash flow. But I stayed silent. I swallowed my doubts. I convinced myself that I was misinterpreting things, that I was just a suspicious old lady, and that if I questioned too much, I would lose the only family connection I had left. The truth is I was afraid. Afraid of being completely alone. Afraid that if I stopped giving, they would stop coming around. Afraid of becoming a forgotten old woman in an empty house, waiting for calls that would never come. So, I kept being the generous mother, the involved grandmother, the one who always had an envelope of cash when needed. I settled for the crumbs of attention they threw my way. A 10-minute phone call every week, a monthly visit that lasted less than an hour, and photos of my grandchildren that I saw on social media because they never sent them to me directly. And I smiled and said everything was fine, that it was enough, that I understood they were busy. But inside something was withering. A part of me was dying of emotional hunger while my bank account was draining. The breaking point began to form 6 months before the cruise, although I didn't know it at the time. Chantel organized a family dinner to celebrate her parents' wedding anniversary. I found out by chance when Araya mentioned something in a quick FaceTime call. "Grandma, I can't talk long. We're getting ready for Grandpa and Nana Holt's party." I felt a sharp pain in my stomach. Grandpa and Nana Holt, as if I didn't exist. As if I wasn't a grandmother too. I called Tavian Brooks that night. Son, Araya mentioned a dinner. There was an awkward silence on the other end. Oh yeah, Mom. It's just something small, intimate. You know how Keandra Brooks's family is, very tight-knit. I don't want you to feel bad, but we thought it would be better this way. I hung up, feeling an emptiness in my chest. I didn't feel bad. I felt invisible, but again I kept silent. Again I swallowed the humiliation. Again I pretended I understood. 2 weeks after that call, Tavian Brooks showed up at my door looking worried. I need to talk to you about something serious, Mom. We went into the living room and he sat on the edge of the couch with his hands clasped, as if preparing to deliver bad news. The company is going through layoffs. There's a chance I might get let go. Keandra Brooks is really stressed. The kids need stability. We need a financial cushion for the next few months, something that will allow us to breathe. He paused for a long time. Could you lend us $20,000? The figure hit me like a punch to the gut. It was more than he had ever asked for at once. Tavian Brooks, that's a lot of money, I said, my voice trembling. I know, Mom. Believe me, if I had another option I wouldn't ask you. But you're the only person we can trust. You're our safety net. Please. His eyes had that scared little boy look that always melted me. And once again I gave in. I transferred the $20,000 on a Tuesday morning. I remember that day perfectly because I had to go to the bank in person to authorize such a large amount. The teller, a young woman with rectangular glasses, asked me 3 times if I was sure. It's for my family, I said. She nodded with a professional smile, but her eyes said something else. I had seen that look before, that mixture of pity and silent judgment reserved for older women who seemed too naive. I signed the papers without further hesitation because at that moment, I still believed I was saving my son from a real crisis. I still believed the money was a temporary bridge to better times. I still believed in the word family. Tavian Brooks called me that afternoon, his voice full of relief. Thank you, Mom. You don't know the weight you've taken off my shoulders. I promise this is temporary. In 6 months I'll pay you back in full. I swear. I hung up feeling useful, needed, and important. What a bitter irony. The next 2 months were strangely silent. Tavian Brooks didn't call as often as before. His texts were short, generic. All good, Mom. Busy with work. Chantel stopped responding to my messages in the family chat. When I tried to video call the grandkids, they were always busy with homework, friends, or extracurriculars. I started to feel that horrible sensation of being a bother, of interrupting lives that worked perfectly fine without me. One afternoon I called Tavian Brooks directly. I needed to hear his voice. I needed confirmation that I still existed for him. Mom, I can't talk right now. I'm in an important meeting. I'll call you back, he said hurriedly. He never called back. That night I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea that grew cold while I watched the phone in silence, waiting for something I knew wouldn't arrive. It was Miss Odessa, my neighbor from the apartment next door, who made me start questioning things. She was 68, a widow like me, but there was something different about her, a kind of quiet dignity, a self-possession I lacked. One afternoon she invited me over for coffee. Marlene Dupree, forgive me for prying, but I've seen you these past few months, and you look different, quieter. What's going on? And there, without planning it, unable to hold it in anymore, I told her everything. The loans that were never repaid, the broken promises, the feeling of buying crumbs of attention with $100 bills. Miss Odessa listened without interrupting, her brown eyes fixed on mine. When I finished speaking, she sighed deeply. Marlene Dupree, you aren't a mother. You're a bank, and banks charge interest. Not just financial but emotional. What are you getting back for everything you give? The question haunted me for days. What was I getting back? Rushed calls, obligatory visits, the privilege of being remembered only when money was needed. A week after that conversation, something small but significant happened. It was DeMonte's birthday. My eldest grandson was turning 21. I had bought a gift a month in advance, an expensive genuine leather wallet I knew he would like. I called Tavian Brooks to ask what time the family gathering would be. There was an awkward silence. Mom, DeMonte just wants something small this year. Just with his friends. You know how young people are now, but I'll take your gift to him. Don't worry. I hung up feeling something new. It wasn't sadness. It was rage. Rage that I wasn't even invited to the periphery of their lives. Rage that DeMonte had had 21 birthdays, and I had been present at every single one. I had paid for several, and now I didn't even deserve an hour of his time. That night I opened my laptop and reviewed my bank statements for the last 8 years. I had never done it systematically. I had never added it all up because I was afraid to see the final number. But that night I needed to know. I needed to quantify exactly how much it had cost to maintain the illusion that I mattered. I opened a spreadsheet and started typing. Araya's Sweet 16, $10,000. Kitchen, $8,000. Chantel's car, $12,000. DeMonte's university 3 years, $45,000. Roof, $7,000. Class trip, $3,000. Club membership, $2,000. And I kept adding dresses, tutors, medical emergencies for which I never saw bills, repairs for things that never broke. When I reached the end, the number on the screen glowed like an accusation. $62,300. $62,300 in 8 years. I stared at that figure until the numbers blurred. That was my life. That was the exact sum of 53 years of working, saving, and sacrificing. And what did I have in return? An empty house, a phone that didn't ring, grandchildren who treated me like an awkward obligation, and a son who saw me as a solution to his financial problems, not as a person. I closed the laptop and something inside me hardened. It was as if a steel door had slammed shut in my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I only felt a strange coldness, an icy clarity I had never experienced. For the first time in 8 years, I began to wonder if a mother's love had to be synonymous with self-destruction, if giving without limits was a virtue or just cowardice disguised as sacrifice. A week later, the message about the family trip arrived. Tavian Brooks called me on a Saturday afternoon. His voice was casual, relaxed. Mom, I have to tell you something. We had planned a family cruise for this summer, but we're going to have to cancel it. The economy just isn't allowing for those luxuries. We're going to postpone it for next year when things improve. I felt something strange in my stomach, like a silent alarm. What cruise, son? You never mentioned it to me. Oh, well, it was an idea Keandra Brooks and I had. We wanted to surprise you, but it's better to be realistic, right? No sense in going into debt now. We'll just have a quiet vacation at home. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. All right, son. I understand. We hung up, and I stared at the phone with a strange feeling. Something in his tone wasn't right. Something about the story sounded rehearsed, but I decided to believe him. I decided to give him one last chance, the benefit of the doubt, that blind faith that mothers reserve for their children, even when all the evidence screams that they are wrong. The summer holidays arrived and I stayed home. I cleaned closets that didn't need cleaning. I reorganized old photos. I cooked elaborate meals for one person and stored the leftovers in the refrigerator until they spoiled. One afternoon, Miss Odessa invited me to go with her to a book club for older women at the community center. No, thank you, I said. I'm not in the mood. She looked at me with that brutal frankness that only good friends allow themselves. Marlene Dupree, are you waiting for your phone to ring? You're living in pause. That's not life. It's just existing. She was right, but I wasn't ready to admit it. Not yet. 3 weeks passed from the start of the holidays. 3 weeks of almost absolute silence from Tavian Brooks. Not a call to ask how I was. Not a simple text to see if I needed anything, nothing. Just that emptiness that felt heavier every day. I tried to convince myself that he was busy, that having a family also required time, and that he was probably dedicating himself to the kids, letting them enjoy that much-needed rest. But deep down, in that dark place where we keep the truths we don't want to face, I knew something wasn't right. There was a persistent unease. Like when you know you forgot something important, but can't remember what. That feeling stayed with me from morning until night, settled in my stomach like a cold stone. On a Thursday afternoon while making a vegetable soup, I realized I wouldn't finish it. My phone vibrated with a notification. It was Instagram. I didn't usually check social media much. I had only installed it so I could see pictures of my grandchildren, those small fragments of their lives I had been reduced to. But that day something made me open the app. Maybe it was intuition, maybe it was the universe pushing me toward the truth I had been avoiding. I saw that Keandra Brooks had posted something 20 minutes ago. My heart started beating faster and I didn't know why. I tapped her profile and there it was. The first photo was of her on the deck of a huge ship with the turquoise sea behind her, wearing that coral dress that must have cost a fortune, her sunglasses reflecting the sky, and a perfect smile, too perfect. The caption read, "Unforgettable family vacation." I swiped to the next photo. Tavian Brooks was there in a white linen shirt, tanned, holding a cocktail decorated with tropical fruit and a tiny umbrella. He looked relaxed, happy, without a single worry on his face. Nothing in that image suggested financial problems. Nothing indicated that he had had to cancel the trip for lack of money. I kept swiping. DeMonte and Araya were by the ship's pool, wearing those expensive straw hats sold in the cruise line's luxury boutiques. Another photo of the whole family having dinner in what looked like an elegant restaurant inside the ship with white tablecloths and wine glasses. And then the one that completely shattered me, a group photo. Tavian Brooks, Keandra Brooks, DeMonte, Araya, and Keandra Brooks's parents, Mr. Lionel Hayes and Mrs. Viola Hayes. All smiling, all toasting, all together. A complete family enjoying an unforgettable vacation. Everyone but me. I felt the air rush out of my lungs. My hands began to shake so much that I almost dropped the phone. I looked at the photos again, one by one, as if I were searching for a logical explanation, some detail that would prove I was misinterpreting everything. But there was nothing to interpret. The truth was brutal and simple. They had lied to me. Tavian Brooks had looked me in the eye while he spoke to me on the phone with that serious, worried voice, and he had deliberately lied to me. They hadn't canceled the trip. They had canceled me. They had decided that I didn't deserve to be there. That the grandmother who had financed their lives for 8 years wasn't important enough to be included in the unforgettable family vacation. But Keandra Brooks's mother was. She deserved to be in those photos. She was part of the family. I counted the posts. 14 in total. 14 moments captured and shared with the whole world. 14 proofs that my existence in their lives was completely dispensable. In one of the photos, Keandra Brooks posed in front of a giant plate of lobster with the phrase, "When life treats you right." As if life had been the generous one, as if the money for that cruise had fallen from the sky. I started mentally calculating the cost of a Caribbean cruise for 5 people because, obviously, Keandra Brooks's parents were included in the package. With the ocean view cabin seen in the photos, the elaborate food, and the decorated cocktails, I was easily looking at $10,000, maybe more. $15,000 spent on a vacation while they were telling me they had financial problems, while they were asking me to understand that they couldn't afford those luxuries. I stood up and walked to the window. My legs felt weak, like they belonged to someone else. Outside, the sun shone indifferently. People walked down the street living their normal lives while mine fell apart in silence. I picked up the phone again. This time I analyzed every detail with a coldness I didn't know I possessed. The date of the posts matched exactly the 3 weeks they had been on vacation, the same 3 weeks I had spent alone at home feeling guilty for questioning their version of events, convincing myself that I was a distrustful mother for doubting my own son. I zoomed in on one of the photos where the name of the cruise line was visible on a life preserver. I searched online. It was a luxury line. One of those that advertised premium experiences, 5-star gastronomy, and world-class entertainment. It was definitely not a budget trip. I closed my eyes and tried to take a deep breath, but the air wouldn't fill my lungs completely. There was a pressure in my chest as if someone were sitting on my ribs. It wasn't just the lie. It was the premeditation. They had planned this. They had consciously decided to exclude me. They had cooked up a whole story just to keep me away. And the really awful part, the thing that just gutted me, was that they didn't even bother to keep it private. They put it all over social media. They knew I might see it. Or maybe, and this was even more hurtful, they just didn't care. Maybe they didn't even think about me enough to consider that I would see those photos. Maybe I was so unimportant in their lives that they weren't even going to bother blocking me from their posts. I just sank back down, this time onto the floor with my back against the wall. My phone was still clutched in my hand, the photos still glaring from the screen. I started thinking about all the times I tried to justify their behavior, all the excuses I'd made up in my head to explain why they were so distant, so cold, always hitting me up for money and then disappearing for long stretches. I thought about that $62,300, every single bank transfer, every envelope stuffed with cash, every empty promise that they'd pay me back. And I asked myself, with this brutal, clear-eyed realization that was way overdue, if I had ever been anything more to them than a walking ATM. Did my son actually love me? Or did he just love what I could give him? Did my grandchildren even really know me? Or did they just know the grandma who showed up with expensive gifts and bailouts? The soup on the stove started to boil over, and that sound snapped me back to reality. I got up like a robot, turned off the burner and poured myself a bowl, even though I knew I wouldn't eat it. I sat down at the kitchen table, the very same table where Tavian Brooks had made so many of his requests, where Keandra Brooks had sipped coffee while she dropped her little digs disguised as concern. And right there in that heavy silence I made up my mind. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to call them. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a confrontation. I wasn't going to hand them the drama they were probably expecting if I ever found out. I was going to do something way more powerful. I was going to stay silent. I was going to wait. And when they needed something again, when they came knocking on my door again with their made-up emergencies and convenient crises, I'd have my answer ready. But it wasn't going to be the answer of the doormat mom I'd been for the past 8 years. It was going to be the answer of a woman who had finally woken up. I put my phone away, but I didn't delete the photos and I didn't block anyone. I wasn't going to make any rash moves. This time I was going to be smart. This time I was going to bide my time and wait for the perfect moment. 3 weeks, I figured. In 3 weeks they'd be back from their cruise, and that's when they'd realize that something had changed. That the human wallet they'd been relying on for 8 years had just been slammed shut for good. That night I didn't get a wink of sleep. I just lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling like some ancient part of me was dying, and something brand new, something tougher and stronger, was starting to rise from the ashes. The days after I found out were just bizarre. I kept up my normal routine, but everything felt off, like I was watching my own life from the outside. I got up, made coffee, cleaned the house, watched TV, but none of it really registered. It was like being underwater, where all the sounds are muffled and far away. Miss Odessa knocked on my door on Saturday morning. "Marlene Dupree, you look terrible. What happened?" She just walked right in without waiting for me to invite her and plopped down on the couch with that comfortable familiarity that only real friends have. I couldn't keep it bottled up anymore. I showed her the photos one after another. She looked at them in silence, her face going from surprise to indignation, and then finally to this cold rage I had never seen in her before. "That son of a bitch," she said flatly. "Excuse my language, Marlene Dupree, but this is unforgivable. This isn't some accident. This is calculated cruelty." I just nodded because I knew if I opened my mouth I'd just fall apart. Miss Odessa stayed with me that whole day and the next one too. She didn't try to give me any empty advice or those tired old platitudes about forgiveness and family. She was just there for me. She made me eat when I didn't have any appetite. She dragged me out for walks in the park when all I wanted to do was hide inside. And most importantly, she let me feel my pain without trying to minimize it. One evening while we were having tea at her place, she said something that really stuck with me. "Marlene Dupree, you don't owe them anything. You don't owe them any more chances. You don't owe them any more understanding. You don't owe them any more sacrifices. You've given enough. You've given way too much. Now it's time to give yourself what they never gave you. Respect." Those words were like permission I didn't even know I needed. Permission to be angry. Permission to cut ties. Permission to finally put myself first after 8 long years. Exactly 21 days went by after I saw those photos. 21 days of complete silence from Tavian Brooks. Not a single text asking how I was doing. Not even a quick call to see if I needed anything. Nada. They were too busy living it up on their fancy cruise to even think about the woman who had made their lifestyle possible. I counted every day, not because I was waiting for them with bated breath, but because I knew without a doubt that at some point they were going to need something. They always needed something. And this time I was going to be ready. I practiced my answer in my head 1,000,000 times. I rehearsed it in front of the mirror. I even wrote it down in a notebook. Just 4 little words that were going to change everything. 4 little words that were going to give me back my self-respect. Ask your wife's family. On the morning of the 22nd day. A Tuesday, my phone buzzed at 7:15 a.m. It was a text from Tavian Brooks. My heart started pounding, but not with that old anxious feeling. It was more like the anticipation a hunter feels when they've been patiently waiting for their prey. I opened the message. Mom, I urgently need $6,000. Credit card issue. I'll pay you back next month. I read those words 5 times. Each time it just confirmed everything I had suspected all along. No hello, no how are you? Not even a quick question about how I was doing after 3 weeks of radio silence. Just the cold, blunt request, not even trying to sugarcoat it. $6,000. Urgent as always, as if the last 8 years had taught them anything except that Mom always says yes. Mom always opens her purse. Mom always understands. But that Mom had died 3 weeks ago in front of those cruise photos. This was a new woman now. A woman who had finally seen the truth and wasn't going to close her eyes again. My fingers were shaking when I started to type my reply, not from fear or hesitation, but from this emotion I was barely able to recognize because I had never felt it directed at my son before. It was power. It was control. It was the icy satisfaction of finally setting a boundary after all those years of being a pushover. I typed, ask your wife's family. I didn't add anything else. No explanations, no accusations, no emojis to soften the blow. Just those 4 words, and then I hit send. The little blue check mark popped up, which meant the message had gone through. And then, almost immediately, the 2 blue checks. Read. I could just picture his face, the initial confusion, then the discomfort, and finally the panic when he realized that something had fundamentally shifted. I didn't have to wait long. 30 seconds later my phone started ringing. Tavian Brooks was calling. I didn't answer it. He called again and again and again. I counted 17 calls in the next 3 hours. 17 desperate attempts to regain control of the situation, to put me back in my place as the obedient, money-dispensing mom. But I didn't pick up any of them. Every call I rejected was an act of personal rebellion. Every ignored ring was a declaration of independence. I was shaking like a leaf. I won't lie. Years of being conditioned to put his needs first were screaming at me to answer, to hear him out, to give him the benefit of the doubt. But there was this other voice, newer but way stronger, that kept reminding me of those cruise photos, that kept reminding me of the $62,000, that kept reminding me that I, too, deserved some respect. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a message came in from Keandra Brooks. It was long and full of exclamation points in capital letters. Marlene Dupree, I don't understand what's going on. Tavian Brooks is so worried. There must be some kind of misunderstanding. Can we please just talk like adults? The children are confused. You can't do this to your own family. I read the message with this calm that surprised even me. There it was, the classic manipulation, trying to make me out to be the bad guy, trying to make it sound like my refusal was some kind of attack on the family, as if I was the one who had broken something. As if setting a boundary after years of being taken advantage of was some kind of unforgivable crime. I noticed that she didn't mention the cruise even once. Not an apology, not even a little acknowledgement of the lie, just outrage at my audacity to say no. I just deleted the message without replying. That was going to drive her way crazier than anything I could have written. That same afternoon, my hands still trembling, but with this growing sense of determination, I went to the bank. I asked for the same teller with the rectangular glasses who had helped me with that $20,000 transfer. She recognized me right away. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" "I need to close the joint account I have with my son," I said. My voice sounded a lot steadier than I thought it would. "I also need to cancel all the extra cards in their names and block any automatic transfer authorizations." She blinked surprised. "Are you sure? This is a big decision." "I am completely sure," I replied. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I filled out all the necessary forms. I signed on the dotted lines, and with every signature, I felt like I was taking back pieces of myself that I had given away, thinking I was buying love. The whole process took almost 2 hours. While the teller was processing everything in the system, I sat in that uncomfortable plastic chair and felt this weird sensation. Peace. It wasn't the quiet, warm peace you see in movies. It was something closer to the silence after a storm, when everything is wrecked, but the rain has finally stopped. The teller handed me the final documents. "The joint account is closed. The cards are canceled. They no longer have access to your funds, ma'am." "Thank you," I said. And then without even planning it, I added, "I should have done this years ago." She looked at me with this sad understanding. Better late than never. Sometimes love makes us blind. I walked out of the bank feeling like I had left behind more than just a bank account. I had left behind 8 years of being invisible, dispensable, only useful when they needed money. When I got home, I had 32 unread messages. Tavian Brooks, Keandra Brooks, even DeMonte had texted, asking what was wrong with Grandma. I quickly scrolled through them all. Not one asked how I was doing. Not one offered an apology. They all just demanded explanations, as if I owed them some kind of justification for protecting myself. The last message was from Tavian Brooks, and it said, "Mom, this is ridiculous. You're an adult. You can't just act like a child because you got upset about something. Call me and let's talk like civilized people." I read those words and something inside me just hardened even more. That's how he saw me, as a child throwing a tantrum, not as a woman who had been lied to, used, and deliberately left out. Not as a mother who deserved a little bit of consideration, just as a broken ATM that needed to be fixed with a few condescending words. That night I sat down to eat dinner alone like I had for the past 3 weeks. But this time it felt different. I set the table properly. I used the nice plates that I usually save for guests who never came. I served myself reasonable portions. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel that horrible emptiness in my chest. I didn't feel like I was waiting for something that was never going to happen. I was just there, present in my own life. After dinner, I made myself some tea and sat on the couch with a book I had bought months ago, but never gotten around to reading. I read 3 chapters straight without any interruptions, without checking my phone every 5 minutes, hoping for messages that would make me feel less alone. The phone was there, buzzing every once in a while with new messages that I systematically ignored, but it didn't control me anymore. It wasn't in charge of my peace of mind. The next few days were this strange mix of freedom and pain. There was this part of me that felt incredibly light, like I had been carrying around a backpack full of rocks for years and had finally set it down. But there were also these moments of panic, that anxiety you get when you break a pattern, even if it was a destructive one that was familiar. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, wondering if I had done the right thing, if I was being too harsh, if a good mother would act this way. But then I'd think about those cruise photos. I think about the lie. I think about that $62,000. And the doubt would just fade away, replaced by something much stronger. Conviction. Miss Odessa came over every afternoon. Sometimes we talked, sometimes we just sat in silence drinking coffee. Just having her there was a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that my reaction was completely justified. A week after I closed the bank account, Tavian Brooks showed up at my door. He didn't call first. He didn't ask if it was a good time. He just showed up on a Saturday morning, ringing the doorbell over and over until I opened it. When I saw him standing there, still tan from the Caribbean sun, wearing some shirt I didn't recognize that he probably bought in some fancy cruise shop, I felt something that I never thought I would feel towards my own son. Coldness. "Mom, we need to talk." he said with that bossy tone he always used when he wanted to take control of the situation. I didn't invite him in. We just stood there in the doorway, him out in the hallway, me blocking the entrance. Talk? I said just like that. He blinked, obviously surprised by my lack of hospitality. This is ridiculous. You can't just close the account like that. You can't just ignore my calls. I'm your son. Exactly, I said with this calm I didn't even know I had. You are my son and I am your mother. Not your bank, not your financial safety net. Not the person you lie to and leave out when it's convenient. Tavian Brooks ran a hand through his hair. A nervous habit he'd had since he was a kid. Mom, if this is about the trip I can explain. We were going to tell you, but Keandra Brooks thought it would be better to surprise you afterwards. Surprise me? I repeated slowly. Surprise me by posting photos on social media where I would see them? Surprise me by lying and saying you canceled the trip because you didn't have the money? Surprise me by taking Keandra Brooks's parents but not me? What kind of surprise is that, Tavian Brooks? He shifted uncomfortably. It was a misunderstanding. Things just got out of hand. You know how Keandra Brooks gets with her planning. No, I stopped him right there. Don't blame this on Keandra Brooks. You called me. You lied to me. You asked me for $6,000 3 weeks after spending who knows how much on that cruise. His face changed. The mask of the concerned son just cracked, and for a second I saw something ugly underneath. Irritation and impatience, like I was just some annoying obstacle that he needed to get rid of so he could go back to normal. Mom, you're overreacting. I'm asking to borrow the money, not for a handout. I've always paid you back. That was it. That was the final straw. That blatant, obvious lie so insulting to my intelligence. Never, I said, raising my voice for the first time. You have never paid me back a single cent. In 8 years, Tavian Brooks, it's $62,300. I did the math. I have it all written down. Every transfer, every temporary loan that was never repaid. So don't you dare stand there and lie to my face again. His face turned red. He looked genuinely surprised that I had kept track of it all, like he had never even considered that I could be that organized, that aware. That's different, he stammered. That was for the family, for the kids, for emergencies. What emergency was the cruise? I asked. He didn't answer. He just looked at me with this mix of frustration and disbelief, like I had suddenly become a stranger. And maybe I had. Maybe the mother he knew, that woman who said yes to everything, who swallowed every story, who always put his needs ahead of her own dignity, had died sometime in the last few weeks. Mom, I don't know what's been going on with you lately, but this has to be fixed. I need access to the account. I need things to go back to normal. No, I said just like that. That one word, so short, so powerful, just hung there in the air between us like a final judgment. There will be no more transfers. There will be no more loans. There will be no more joint account. It's over, Tavian Brooks. He took a step towards me, and for a second I thought he was going to start yelling. But instead his voice came out low and threatening. You're making a mistake. You're going to end up alone, old and alone. And when you need something, when you're the one who needs help, I won't be there. I'm already alone, I replied without any emotion. I've been alone for 3 years. Ever since you decided that I was only worth something if I could give you money. And you know what? I'd rather be truly alone than be surrounded by people who only see me as a walking wallet. Tavian Brooks just shook his head, his expression hardening. You're being selfish. After everything we've done for you, Keandra Brooks includes you in family gatherings, the kids call you, I come to visit. And this is how you pay us back. Every single word was like a slap in the face. So, my presence in their lives was a favor they were doing me. The little bits of attention I got were just a payment for my financial generosity. Not love, not family, just a transaction. Go, I said. My voice just sounded tired. Now get out of my house, Tavian Brooks. He stared at me for what felt like forever, probably expecting me to crack, to give in like I always had. But I just held his gaze without flinching. Finally he turned around. You're going to regret this. he said over his shoulder as he walked towards the elevator. I don't think so, I murmured after the doors closed. I just stood there for a few minutes trying to process what had just happened. I had stood up to my son. I had set some boundaries. I had said no. And the world hadn't ended. The sky hadn't fallen. I was still breathing. I was still standing. I was still myself, only now with a little more self-respect than before. That afternoon Miss Odessa knocked on my door, like she knew I needed her. I told her everything. She gave me a big hug that lasted a long time. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. I know it hurts. I know it's hard. But what you did today was an act of self-love. We cried together, and they weren't exactly tears of sadness, but something more complicated. It was like crying for a version of myself that had died, a version that thought her value was tied to how much she could give, how much she could take, how much she could sacrifice. Miss Odessa didn't leave that night. She stayed for dinner and then we watched some old movie on TV. It was the first time in months that I had really laughed. The first time I had just enjoyed a moment without that constant anxiety in the background, waiting for the phone to ring, for someone to need something, for me to have to be available. The next few days were quieter. Tavian Brooks didn't come back. Keandra Brooks's messages became less frequent until they just stopped completely. It was like they had finally understood that this time I wasn't going to cave. Or maybe they had just found some other sucker to give them money, and I wasn't necessary anymore. Whatever the reason, the silence was a relief. I started doing all the things I had been putting off for years. I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I met some other women my age who were also trying to find themselves again after spending years living for other people. One of them had gone through something similar with her own kids. We became fast friends, connected by that unspoken understanding that only comes from having been through the same kind of hell. One morning, 2 weeks after Tavian Brooks's visit, I went to a travel agency. I had seen an ad for tours of Italy, and something inside me just woke up. I want some information about this trip, I told the agent, who was this young woman with a nice smile. She showed me photos of Rome, Florence, and Venice, places I had always wanted to see but had always put off because there was always something more important to spend my money on. Always someone else who needed it more than I did. How much does it cost? I asked. She told me the price. $4,500 for a 10-day all-inclusive tour. 6 months ago, that number would have seemed impossible to spend on myself. Too selfish, too frivolous. But now, after everything I had been through, after finally realizing that my life was worth something too, that number seemed perfectly reasonable. I'll take it, I said. The agent blinked, surprised that I had made up my mind so fast. Are you sure? Do you want to think about it? I don't need to think about it, I replied. I've been thinking about it my whole life. It's time to do something. Booking that trip was the first truly selfish thing I had done in decades. And I say selfish without that negative weight that the word had always carried for me. It was selfish in the purest sense, something that was just for me, that wasn't going to benefit anyone else, that wasn't going to solve anyone's problems except for my own need to live a little before it was too late. I walked out of the travel agency with the papers in my hand, and this weird feeling in my chest that took me a minute to put my finger on. It was excitement. It was anticipation. It was the feeling of having something to look forward to that didn't involve anyone but myself. I called Miss Odessa from the street. I did it, I said as soon as she picked up. I booked the trip to Italy. She screamed with joy on the other end of the line. Marlene Dupree, that's amazing. I'm so proud of you. When do you leave? In 6 weeks, I said. 10 days touring cities I've only seen on postcards. We hung up and I just stood there on the sidewalk, smiling like a fool, feeling the sun on my face and thinking that maybe, just maybe at 73 years old I was finally learning how to live for myself. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity as I got ready for the trip. I bought a new suitcase because the one I had was old and full of memories of family trips that I never really enjoyed. I went to a clothing store and tried on dresses that I never would have dared to wear before. I bought this mustard-colored one that was so cheerful, so bold, so completely different from all the gray and beige stuff I usually wore. For years I had tried to avoid drawing attention to myself. The saleswoman, a young woman sporting tattoos on her arms, exclaimed, "It looks gorgeous on you. You look radiant." I glanced in the mirror and for the first time in ages, actually liked what I saw. I wasn't the invisible grandmother anymore. I wasn't the rejected mother. I was simply Marlene Dupree, a 73-year-old woman finally choosing herself. I ended up buying the dress and then 2 more. I also invested in comfortable walking shoes, a small camera for photos, and a notebook to jot down my impressions of the trip. Miss Odessa and Miss Geneva were invaluable in the planning stages. We pored over maps, researched restaurants, and compiled lists of places I absolutely couldn't miss. It was fun. It was lighthearted. It was everything my family gatherings had never been. There was no underlying tension, no veiled requests disguised as conversation, just 3 older women genuinely excited about planning an adventure together. One afternoon, while we were having tea in my living room, Miss Geneva asked, "Have you heard anything from your son?" I shook my head. Nothing. Absolute silence. She nodded understandingly. It's better that way. Silence is sometimes the clearest answer. Miss Odessa then chimed in. "Are you worried they might show up while you're gone?" The question caught me completely off guard. I thought about it honestly. "No," I finally replied. "I'm not afraid of anything they can do or say anymore. That power is over." 2 weeks before the trip, something truly unexpected happened. I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Regarding Tavian Brooks and Keandra Brooks." I opened it with a mix of curiosity and caution. It was from Mr. Lionel Hayes Holt, Keandra Brooks's father. The message was formal but direct. "Dear Marlene Dupree, I recently learned of the situation between you and my daughter and son-in-law. Keandra Brooks finally told me about the cruise and the circumstances surrounding it. I want you to know that I was completely unaware that they had lied to you about the trip's cancellation. Had I known, I would never have accepted the invitation. What they did was completely unacceptable. You deserve an apology, which I suspect you will never receive from them. So I offer you mine. I also want you to know that my wife and I will no longer accept anything from them that indirectly comes from your generosity. We have had a serious conversation with Keandra Brooks about values and respect. I wish you the very best. Sincerely, Mr. Lionel Hayes Holt." I read the email 3 times. I honestly didn't expect that. I didn't expect anyone from that side of the family to have the decency to even acknowledge what had happened. I replied briefly, "Dear Mr. Lionel Hayes, I appreciate your message and your honesty. I hold no resentment toward you or your wife. I hope Keandra Brooks learns from this. Regards, Marlene Dupree Payne." It was strange, almost absurd. My daughter-in-law's father had more integrity than my own son. The irony was definitely not lost on me, but it also gave me something akin to hope. Not hope that things with Tavian Brooks would improve, but hope that there were still decent people left in the world. People who recognized when something was wrong. People who apologized even when it wasn't directly their fault. That was more than my son had ever done. The day before my trip, as I was finishing packing, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't have saved, but I recognized it immediately. DeMonte, my oldest grandson. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I finally said. "Grandma." His voice sounded strange, almost nervous. "Can I talk to you?" "Of course," I replied, mentally bracing myself for some manipulative request. But what he said completely surprised me. "Grandma, I want to apologize. I know Mom and Dad lied to you about the cruise. I heard the arguments. I know they've been asking you for money for years, and I never said anything. I was complicit in my silence. I am so sorry." I sat on the edge of the bed trying to process his words. DeMonte was 21. He was an adult and he was taking responsibility for his part in all of this. That was more mature than anything his father had ever done. "Thank you for calling, DeMonte," I said softly. "That means a lot to me." There was a long silence on the other end. "Grandma, there's something else you need to know. Mom and Dad are in serious financial trouble. They've always lived beyond their means. I think they counted on your money as part of their budget. Now that you closed the account, they are panicking. They had to sell Mom's car. They are behind on payments for several things. And instead of accepting that they created this problem, they are blaming you. My heart hardened. So it was true. These weren't emergencies. They weren't temporary crises. It was a lifestyle they simply couldn't sustain without my money. DeMonte, I appreciate you telling me this, but you need to understand something. I am not responsible for your parents' financial problems. They are adults. They made their decisions. Now they have to live with the consequences. I know, he said quickly. I'm not calling to ask you to help them. I'm calling because I want you to know that I don't think like them, that I understand what they did to you was wrong, and that if you ever want to have a relationship with me independent of them, I would like that. Those words touched me deeply. It was the closest thing to a victory I could expect from this whole situation. Not getting my son back, but maybe eventually having a real connection with my grandson, one based on mutual respect, not financial transactions. I would like that too, DeMonte, I replied, my voice cracking. Thank you for calling. Take care of yourself. You too, Grandma, and enjoy your trip. Araya told me you deserve it. We hung up, and I sat there with the phone still in my hand, crying softly. But this time they weren't tears of pain. It was something closer to relief, the validation of knowing I wasn't crazy, that my reaction had been justified. The next morning, Miss Odessa and Miss Geneva accompanied me to the airport. I had my new suitcase, my mustard dress carefully packed, my camera, my notebook, and for the first time in 8 years, I carried something even more important, hope. Hope that life still had good things reserved for me, that it wasn't too late to be happy, that 73 wasn't the end, but perhaps a new beginning. We hugged at the airport entrance. Miss Odessa squeezed me tight. You're going to be incredible, she whispered. You'll come back renewed. Don't let anything or anyone take this from you. I promise, I said. And I meant it. I walked through airport security feeling lighter than I had in years. Every step away from my old life was a step towards something new. Something mine. Something no one could take away from me. Because I hadn't bought it with their approval or their presence. I had bought it with my own money, earned by my own work, for my own happiness. The flight was long, but I didn't care. I looked out the window at the clouds, thinking about everything I had gone through to get there. The $62,000 lost, the lies discovered, the difficult confrontations, the boundaries set, and finally this freedom. When the plane landed in Rome, I got off with the other passengers, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about anyone else. I wasn't worrying about whether Tavian Brooks needed something. I wasn't feeling guilty about spending money on myself. I wasn't justifying my decisions to anyone. I was just there, present, alive, ready for 10 days of discovery. Not just of Italy, but of myself. Who was Marlene Dupree when no one else was watching? When no one else was asking? When no one else mattered but me? Italy was a revelation, not just for the stunning architecture, the delicious food, or the history-filled streets. It was a revelation because I discovered that I could be happy alone, that I didn't need my family's validation to feel that my life had purpose, that at 73, I could still surprise myself. The first day in Florence, I walked until my feet ached. I visited the Uffizi Gallery and stood in front of a painting for 20 minutes, just feeling. No one rushed me. No one asked when we were going to eat. No one complained about being bored. It was just me and the art and the comfortable silence of being at peace with myself. I ate at a small trattoria where the waiter, an older man with a gray mustache, treated me as if I were the most important customer in the world. He recommended a wine. He told me stories about the neighborhood, and I laughed genuinely for the first time in months. In Venice, I sat by the water and watched the canals. The water was a color I had never seen in person. There were families playing, young couples holding hands, and older people like me walking along the edge. Everyone seemed to be exactly where they should be. I took out my notebook and started writing. Not a structured diary, just loose thoughts. Asterisk, I have lived for 73 years, and only now do I understand that my happiness shouldn't depend on making others happy. Giving until I was empty wasn't love. It was self-destruction. Real family isn't the one that shares your blood. It's the one that respects your heart. The words flowed effortlessly, as if I had been storing them for years, and they had finally found an outlet. A woman sat near me. She was Italian, with completely white hair and deep wrinkles around her eyes. She asked me in Italian where I was from. I answered in my imperfect English, America. Ah, American, she smiled. Traveling alone? Yes, I replied. And for the first time that phrase didn't sound sad or lonely. Sounded like a choice, like power. She nodded with understanding. Me too. My children want me to stay home, to wait for them, to be available when they need me. But I decided that my last years will be mine. We looked at each other, and in that moment we shared something that needed no words. That silent understanding between women who have lived whole lives prioritizing others, and have finally decided to prioritize themselves. We talked for an hour. She told me about her life, her disappointments, her small acts of rebellion. I told her my story. She listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she placed her wrinkled hand on mine. You did the right thing, she said simply. Forgiveness is important, but self-respect is sacred. We said goodbye with a hug, and I never saw her again, but her words stayed with me. In Florence, I visited the Duomo and climbed to the top. The steps were steep, and my breathing grew labored, but I didn't give up. When I reached the top, the view of the city took my breath away. Everything looked small from up there. My problems, my pains, my ungrateful son. Everything was tiny compared to the vastness of the world. I took out my camera and took photos. Not to show anyone, but to remember this moment, to have physical evidence that Marlene Dupree was here, that she existed beyond being a mother, a grandmother, a wallet. A young couple asked me to take their picture. I did it gladly. Then they insisted on taking one of me. I hesitated. I wasn't used to being the center of attention, but I accepted. I stood in front of the overlook with the wind moving my gray hair, and I smiled. A real unforced smile. When I saw the photo afterward, I barely recognized myself. There was something different in my eyes, something akin to freedom. Every city taught me something. In Venice, as I watched the gondolas, I understood that the most valuable things require patience and care, and that I had spent all my patience on people who didn't value it, forgetting to build something beautiful for myself. In Rome, as I ate authentic pasta, I understood that nourishing my body and soul wasn't selfishness. It was survival. I had spent years feeding others while I starved emotionally. In each place, I left something behind, not physical things, but pieces of the old Marlene Dupree, the one who was afraid, the one who felt guilty, the one who thought her worth resided in her usefulness. That woman was left behind in every Italian city until only the new Marlene Dupree remained, the one who knew her value, the one who didn't ask permission to be happy. Throughout the trip, I kept my phone in airplane mode most of the time. I only turned it on once a day to send a quick text to Miss Odessa telling her I was okay. I didn't check for messages from Tavian Brooks. I didn't look for updates on social media. I didn't allow myself to be reabsorbed into that world that had consumed me for so long. And it was liberating. It was like detoxing from an addiction I didn't know I had. The addiction to being needed. The addiction to feeling that I mattered, even if it was only for my money. I was learning to matter to myself, and that was enough. On the last day of the tour, the group had a farewell dinner in Rome. There were 15 of us from different countries and of all ages. During dinner, the guide asked us to share what the trip had meant to each of us. When my turn came, I hesitated. I wasn't good at speaking in front of groups, but something pushed me to be honest. This trip, I began, my voice trembling, wasn't just about seeing Italy. It was about seeing myself after years of being lost in the needs of others. I came here after cutting financial ties with my son, who was using me like a bank. I came here after deciding that my last years were mine, not for people who only value me for what I can give. And I discovered that I can be happy alone, that chosen solitude is better than company that makes you feel invisible. So this trip saved my life. Not literally, but it saved what was left of my dignity. When I finished, there were tears in my eyes and also in the eyes of several people in the group. A woman from Canada stood up and hugged me. "Me too," she whispered. "I'm learning that too." We hugged like sisters in pain and in healing. That night, in my hotel room, I finally turned my phone on completely. I had 53 unread messages. Most were from unknown numbers, some from Keandra Brooks, a few from Tavian Brooks. I opened one at random from Keandra Brooks. It read, "Marlene Dupree, Tavian Brooks and I are having serious financial problems. We had to sell the car. The kids are suffering because of your selfishness. I hope you're happy." I read the message without feeling anything. Neither guilt nor rage, only indifference. It was fascinating how someone could take zero responsibility for their own decisions, how they could spend money they didn't have on a luxury cruise and then blame me for the consequences of their actions. I deleted the message. I checked a few more. All had the same tone. Accusations, manipulation, attempts to make me feel guilty. But this time it didn't work. The part of me that responded to manipulation had died. I deleted all the messages without replying to any of them. There was a message from DeMonte. It was different. "Grandma, I hope your trip is amazing. Mom and Dad are mad, but that's not your problem. I started looking for a job so I can move out on my own. I don't want to be part of this dynamic anymore. When you get back, I'd like to see you without them. Just you and me. Take care." That message made me cry, but they were good tears. Tears of hope. My grandson was breaking the pattern. He was choosing to be different. I replied briefly. "DeMonte, the trip was transformative. I'd love to see you when I get back. I'm proud of you for making your own decisions. I love you. Send." Then I turned off the phone again. Tomorrow I would fly back home, but I wouldn't be the same woman who had left. That Marlene Dupree had stayed somewhere between Rome and Venice. The one returning was stronger, more aware, more complete. The flight back was different from the outbound one. This time I wasn't looking ahead with nervous hope. I was looking back with gratitude. Gratitude for every lesson learned, for every boundary set, for every time I chose my peace over their approval. When the plane landed, Miss Odessa and Miss Geneva were waiting for me. They ran toward me when I came out, and the three of us hugged, crying and laughing at the same time. "You look different," Miss Odessa said, pulling back to look at me closely. "There's something in your eyes." "I am different," I confirmed. "I am complete." On the way home, I told them about the trip. The cities, the woman on the water's edge, the farewell dinner. And they listened with the attention that only true friends give. When we arrived at my apartment, something surprised me. There was a box in front of my door. The box was wrapped in plain brown paper with no sender label. Miss Odessa and Miss Geneva looked at each other cautiously. "Do you want us to stay while you open it?" Miss Geneva asked. I nodded. I didn't know what to expect, but their presence gave me security. We went into the apartment, and I put the suitcase aside. The box wasn't heavy. I placed it on the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Inside were several things. First, a letter in a white envelope. Beneath it, all the cards I had given Tavian Brooks over the years. Birthday cards, Father's Day cards, Christmas cards. There were also old photos from when he was a child, his graduation, his wedding. And at the bottom, a check. I took it out with trembling hands. It was for $5,000, signed by Tavian Brooks. In the memo line it said, "First payment." I stared at the check for a long time, unsure how to feel. Miss Odessa broke the silence. "Read the letter," she said softly. I opened the envelope. The handwriting was Tavian Brooks. That slanted script I had known since he learned to write. "Mom, I don't know how to start this letter. I've written and rewritten these words for weeks. Nothing sounds like enough. Nothing can repair what I did, but I need to try. You are right about everything. I used you. I lied to you. I treated you like a bank instead of my mother. And the worst part is I knew it the whole time. I knew what we were doing was wrong. I knew we were hurting you. But it was easier to keep taking your money than to face our own financial problems. Chantel and I were living way above our means. We wanted to pretend we had a status we didn't. And you were the one who paid for our vanity. The cruise was the last straw, but honestly it should have been any of the other 100 times I failed you before that. When you closed the bank account I got angry. I blamed you. I told Chantel you were being irrational and vengeful. But when everything started to collapse, when we had to sell the car, when we fell behind on payments, when we faced the real consequences of our decisions without your safety net, something changed. I started to see what I had done. I started to understand the magnitude of my betrayal. I talked to DeMonte. He told me some very hard but very true things. He told me I lost you not when you closed the account but years before, when I decided you were more useful as a wallet than as a mother. And he was right. This check is just the beginning. I know $5,000 is nothing compared to the $62,000 I owe you, but it's all I could put together by selling some things and working extra hours. I plan to pay you $1,000 every month until I repay everything, not because I expect your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I continued reading. I'm not asking you to call me. I'm not asking us to go back to how things were because that would be impossible. And frankly, you deserve better than how things were before. I only ask you to know that I finally understood. I understood that I had an extraordinary mother, and I treated her like garbage. I understood that the love you gave me throughout my life was invaluable, and I repaid it with indifference and usage. Chantel and I are in couples therapy. I'm also going to individual therapy. We are facing our problems head-on for the first time in our marriage. It's painful and difficult but necessary. The grandkids are also learning about financial responsibility and treating family with real respect, not transactional respect. I love you, Mom. I am so sorry I hurt you. Tavian Brooks. I folded the letter slowly and placed it on the table. Miss Odessa and Miss Geneva looked at me expectantly. What are you going to do? Miss Odessa asked. I don't know, I replied honestly. Part of me wants to tear up the check and tell him it's too late. But another part, a very small but persistent part, wants to believe people can change. Miss Geneva took my hand. You don't have to decide anything now. Let time show you if it's genuine or just another manipulation. She was right. I had learned during these months that not all decisions needed to be made immediately, that it was okay to sit with the discomfort of not knowing. I put the letter and the check in a drawer. I would decide later. For now, I just wanted to enjoy being home after a life-changing trip. My friend stayed that night. We cooked together. We laughed. I shared photos of the trip, and for the first time in years my house felt full in the right way. The following days were about adjusting. I returned to my routine, but it was different. I no longer spent hours looking at the phone, waiting for messages that would make me feel needed. Instead, I filled my time with things I genuinely enjoyed. The painting class, walks with Miss Odessa, coffee with Miss Geneva, and video calls with DeMonte, who kept his word and began visiting me independently of his parents. These visits were different. He didn't come with his hand out. He came with stories about his new job, with genuine questions about my life, with real interest in getting to know the grandmother beyond the role she had played in their dysfunctional family. One afternoon he brought me flowers. Just because, he said. Because I want you to know I value you. I cried because finally, someone in my family was giving me something without expecting anything in return. That was real family. 6 months after the trip to Italy, something changed. Tavian Brooks's check was still in the drawer, uncashed, but every week, an envelope with $1,000 in cash arrived in my mailbox. No notes, no explanations, just the money fulfilling his promise. We met occasionally for coffee, always brief, always with clear boundaries. Chantel and I maintained a cordial but distant relationship. DeMonte and Araya visited me regularly, and without the pressure from their parents, we had built something real. Miss Odessa, and yet became my chosen family, the people I knew I could always count on. We traveled the world together, shared countless laughs, and grew older together, living life on our own terms without seeking approval from anyone else. Last year I returned to Italy, this time with Miss Odessa by my side. We revisited all the familiar places, but the experience was different, profoundly so, because I myself had changed. I was stronger, more complete, and more truly myself than ever before. Today, 2 years after stumbling upon those cruise photos, I've finally found peace of mind. Tavian Brooks is still diligently working to pay off the debt. We've managed to pay about $32,000 towards the total of $62,000. Our relationship remains civil, but it's definitely not the same as it once was. And honestly, that's perfectly fine because I learned the most valuable lesson of my life at the age of 73. True family doesn't demand an entrance fee. Real love doesn't drain your bank account or your very soul. And it's absolutely never too late to choose yourself and prioritize your own well-being. I didn't actually lose $62,000. What I did was I bought my freedom. I bought my dignity back. I purchased my peace of mind. I bought the opportunity to live out my remaining years without being burdened by the weight of other people's expectations. And if my story resonated with you in any way, if you connected with any part of it, if it prompted you to reflect on your own boundaries or your relationships, then my pain served a purpose greater than just my own healing. It served as a reminder to you that you too deserve respect, that you also have the power to say no, that you too can choose yourself without feeling any guilt whatsoever. Because when it all comes down to it, the only person you're guaranteed to spend your entire life with is yourself. And that person deserves all of your love, all of your protection, and all of your loyalty before you extend those things to anyone else. Even before you give it to family, because if you don't take care of yourself and your needs, no one else will. And that's possibly the hardest and most liberating truth you'll ever come to terms with. So, did you enjoy my story? And what city are you listening from right now? I'd love to connect in the comments below. If you appreciated the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks, which allows me to continue sharing more stories like this one. Thank you so much for all of your wonderful support. I'm really looking forward to reading your comments and hearing your thoughts on the story. On the screen right now, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend you check out. There's so much more content available on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss anything. I'll see you in the next life story with love and respect.